And so when they all had confessed that 0% of their sex was God approved, I said, if it's 0% that's God approved, don't you think there's consequences to that? And we got to talk about some consequences, and there's a whole lot of consequences to this. And I said, a lot of people will say they sleep together before they're married because they love each other. And I shared about a couple. Sandy and I know a couple from Texas, maybe about 12 years ago. And before they got married, they came to us and said, Pastor Nick, Pastor Sandy, we're getting married in 6 months, but we're having premarital sex, and we want to stop. We want to be able to honor God with this area of our lives. And we said, no problem. We'll come alongside with you. We'll pray with you, and we'll keep you strong and do the best we can. I said, but let me ask you a couple questions before we get started. I said, number one, are you going to tell your parents? And they said, no, because God has already forgiven us and we've forgiven each other. Our parents don't need to know this. And I said, number two, well, why did you guys sleep with each other? And they said, because we love each other. And I said, okay. So we moved on, and for about 6 months, I believe they kept themselves, they maintained their purity. And so what ends up happening on the day of the wedding, they're in the church, and at the church is full, people are there, the bride and the groom, they're all dressed up, all beautiful and everything. But what ends up happening is there was a moment during the ceremony, when the groom's parents had an opportunity to take the microphone and speak. And the groom's parents got up and they said, we've been praying that our son would maintain his purity and his virginity up to this point. We've also been praying for a godly wife for him, and the woman that we've been praying for, that she understands her purity and that they would not sell out, they wouldn't compromise, and God is going to bless this union. Likewise, the bride's parents were able to get up and say similar words. They get up and said, we're just so thankful that our daughter and our son-in-law here, they maintain themselves, and they're pure before God, and he's going to bless this union. They understood, and they were strong, and they were patient, and they were disciplined. And now, I asked the prisoners, in this scenario that I'm telling you about, true story, in this scenario, what do 4 people know? And the 4 people were the bride, the groom, Sandy, and me. What do 4 people know? And they all said, well, they know that what the mom and dads are saying is not true. But the whole church was all crying, like, this is so beautiful, boo. And but I shared that when the bride and the groom were standing there, they had their heads down in shame and regret and guilt. And my whole point in sharing that story is because I asked them right up front, I asked the prisoners, why did they say they slept with each other? And they said, well, we love each other. And I said, see, that's not true. That can't be true. And you know why I know that cannot be true? Is because love can never produce that kind of shame or guilt. It just can't. Love cannot do that. So the bottom line, the reason I shared that story with them, I wanted to stress to them that the number one reason why married people have better sex, and not in all cases, just generally speaking, married people have better sex and more sex, is because the sex that they have is guilt-free. And I had them think about that. What does it mean to have guilt-free sex? It means it's God approved. And if you read Song of Solomon right around the end of chapter 4, beginning of chapter 5, you watch a man and a woman about to make love. And right at the end of that chapter, God is a part of that. I said, God says, I created this for you. This is beautiful. Drink deeply and enjoy. And I told the prisoners, basically a rough translation is get jiggy with it, smack it up, flip it up, rub it down, and have fun with this, because I created this for you and it's good. And so, as we close, I want you to know that all pleasure, and I share this with the prisoners, all pleasure will cost you something. For legitimate pleasure, you pay for it in the front. For illegitimate pleasure, you'll pay for it on the back. What does that mean? That means, let's, for example, premarital sex. If you do not have premarital sex and you abstain and you hold out, then what you're doing, you're paying for it up front with discipline, understanding, patience, integrity, purity. You're holding on, so when the time comes for you to have sex, it's God approved and it's great and it's guilt-free. For illegitimate pleasure, you pay for it on the back end, which means that you weren't strong enough, you didn't abstain, you couldn't hold back, you were undisciplined, maybe you just didn't know, and you had sex up front. Well, the consequences of that you'll pay in the back end with sin in the foundation of your marriage. The Bible calls them whoredoms. talk about the whore's domain later. But, and then it also comes up with patterns of rationalization and guilt and regret. You're always wondering, always looking back, wondering. And mistrust comes into the issue because that record, if you had premarital sex before, that record shows what kind of people you were. I know I had premarital sex. I'll tell you about that some other time. And so there's these patterns of guilt and rationalization that are in your character that need to come out. And you pay for that on the back end because there was undiscipline. You didn't wait, and there's consequences. So the bottom line here, the best sex is God-approved sex. And when we examine our sexual records, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, what percentage of our sex did God actually approve of? The beauty of all this is God knew that we would be messing some things up, particularly in this area of sex. But he says, I still love them so much that I'll forgive them, I'll restore them, I'll heal them, all through my Son, Jesus Christ, because I love them so much. That's the message here. So God bless you. And Philippians 4:8 says to think on these things.